to the 25th Real World Film Festival, and thank you for joining us on Digital Day. Hi, welcome. First, the land on which Real World operates is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, and the Chippewa. The Real World office is located in Toronto, which falls under the Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. These sovereign nations have inhabited, protected, and cared for this land since time immemorial. We humbly acknowledge this enduring truth and our responsibilities as guests on this territory. Real World recognizes that European colonialism violently dispossessed many Indigenous peoples of their ancestral lands and continues to erase and marginalize their histories, cultures, and sovereignty. As an organization representing artists and communities from many diasporas and scattered lands, we stand in solidarity with Indigenous people in their ongoing struggles for justice and self-determination. As settlers, immigrants, and descendants of immigrants, we and our ancestors have benefited from settler colonialism systems, laws, and policies that continue to occupy stolen Indigenous lands. We are committed to learning from, with, and alongside Indigenous peoples and to working to dismantle white supremacy and settler colonialism in all spheres of cultural, social, political, and economic life. We invite our community to reflect on their relationships to this land, to Indigenous sovereignty, and to take meaningful action towards truth, justice, and reconciliation. Hello, my name is Saffron Maeve, and I'm a Toronto-based critic, editor, and film curator. I'm so pleased to be moderating today's New Critics, New Perspective panel with two wonderful guests, Winnie Wang and Divine Angabua. To start, I would love for you both to introduce yourselves and your critical practices. Winnie, maybe we can start with you.
Sure, yeah. Hi, my name is Winnie. I'm a writer and cultural worker. I've written for publications like LA Review of Books, CinemaScope, Documentary Magazine, POV, Toronto Star, and The Mood Magazine. I tend to write about film, documentary, and literature, and then within those categories, I'm interested in drawing out how the work deals with form, experimentation, gender, fashion, the environment. And then I write film criticism, but I also kind of dabble in institutional criticism in my festival dispatches, and this comes from my experience working on the industry side as an arts administrator or industry programmer, where I get to witness a lot of like behind the scenes mechanics of like how grants work or how institutions prioritize programs or allocate budgets, how decision makers make their decisions, and that really feeds into my writing because it provides me access to festivals or just allows me to peek behind the curtain. And that kind of criticism is both in film and institution.
Thank you, Winnie. Divine, would you like to share?
Sure. I'm Divine, and I'm an arts and culture critic living and working in Toronto. I've written for a lot of student publications. I went to U of T, so I wrote for the Varsity a lot. I wrote for the Medium at the university, at the Mississauga campus. I wrote for Goose magazine, for a bunch of research publications. I write for Next magazine and Liminal magazine, and I write about film, theater, art, anything that will help me reckon with the conditions of my existence. So, yeah, happy to be here.
Thank you. Welcome, both of you. I think this idea of institutional reckoning is very on the mind right now. I often find that when sitting on panels about film criticism, it's nice to be on this side of it, but it's really easy to default to the doom and gloom of the kind of economic precarity in the industry. And these things are certainly true, but also I'd really like to start from a more optimistic place. So I'm hoping to know what first appealed to you about writing film criticism. Was there a particular film or moment that made you inspired to pursue criticism? Maybe we can start with you, Divine.
It's hard to pinpoint a specific moment or a specific event that moved me toward film criticism, but I remember like a few moments, like I think watching Conclave at TIFF last year, and like not thinking about like the ending, which I did not like, but whatever it made me feel, made me excited to think about it.
Sorry, Divine, I'm having trouble hearing you. Winnie, are you able to hear?
Oh.
Sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
I can hear you now.
Sorry to interrupt you.
No, you're so good. Yeah, I was saying, watching Conclave at TIFF last year and feeling whatever it made me feel, which then made me excited to think about the film in writing. And then I recently saw a film, Black Girl, by, I forget his name, Osama something. He's like a sub-Saharan African director. And yeah, like anything that helps me think about like my place in the world in a different way, like things like that led me toward film criticism, because yeah, just it's a kind of mirror in which to see myself and other people. So yeah.
Winnie, do you want to add?
Yeah, for me, it was just that I was really frustrated by what I was reading. I didn't read what I wanted to see in the world. So I was like, okay, like I'll jump in and see what I can do. But it was specifically after I read A.S. Hamra's The Earth Dies Streaming, which is a collection of his criticism for the magazine N+1, that made me like excited about what film criticism could be, because it wasn't all just about the film. It was about like the viewing conditions or the political circumstances around a film. It was about drawing connections between different viewings, and that made me really excited. But specifically what I wanted to do at the beginning, what appealed to me was like making an intervention. It was seeing that a lot of film criticism in Canada was very generous and perhaps uncritical of Canadian film, perhaps because it's such a small industry and you don't want to like ruffle any feathers, but that made me want to go ruffle some feathers and lend a different perspective, especially with how we talk about like diaspora or diasporic narratives. I felt like I had the authority to lend a different perspective, and I wanted to do that out of love for the medium, because I want it to improve, be better, different, more nuanced. But now what I like about film criticism and what like the positive aspects is that it's a practice that reminds me to be in touch with myself, kind of like what Davine was saying earlier, like helps me to reckon with my own existence, to engage with the world and be curious about it. And now it's like something that really pushes me creatively and emotionally.
I wanted to also ask, kind of in tandem with that and what you lean towards as a writer, if you remember your first piece of published writing, and maybe get into the sort of semantics about how you went about pitching it. Winnie, do you actually want to start with that? Because I think I feel like...
Yeah, well, because you're part of it, actually. It was for Little White Lies. It was on a film called Stella Dallas for its 85th anniversary. Fashion is something I think a lot about. I had written a paper about it. It was an academic paper, but I wanted to adapt it in time for its anniversary. And that's something you'd think about, like a timely peg. And it was coming up, so I thought about Little White Lies, which had a column for In Praise Of. And the site was like pretty friendly to newer writers. So I went on the pitching guidelines page where it like tells you about like word count, like formatting, what to put in your pitch. And my kind of pitch was that I wanted to do a reparative reading of the film against like this maternal melodrama narrative, and kind of like recuperate her as this person who's actually a style icon, not someone who is like unable to like dress for the upper class. She's someone who is in the upper class through marriage, but like wants to stick with her sartorial tastes. And so I wanted to write about that from that angle. And I actually sent my pitch email to you to review, and you generously did. And you recommended that I also mention that I ran a fashion newsletter. Like that was something that kind of bolstered the argument for me writing it in particular. Like that's something that writers should think about. Why are you the person to write this piece instead of someone else? Like what expertise or experience do you have? And that was something that I did end up mentioning because of your generous advice. And then it was accepted about a week later and got published in time for the anniversary. And then I read it at your crit salon, so it feels very full circle. Yeah.
A really wonderful piece of writing. And the crit salon, which Winnie is referring to, is I host a quarterly event for film critics to read either something they've written in the past or are working on or developing in real time in front of a live audience out of the Transact Club. And Winnie very generously read that piece. I suggest people go write it. Divine, do you want to add yours, either your first piece of writing or published writing or kind of an experience pitching?
I think for me, the first published piece of writing of mine was probably something in like my first year of university. I was like new to Canada and I was like, oh my God, I like do not exist. So let me just write somewhere and put my name out there. So I think I like stalked a campus newspaper and just like harassed the editor. Like, I need to write, like, trust me, I'm so good. And they somehow like let me write something. I think I wrote a kind of obituary for it wasn't film criticism. It was like retrospective of some great African leader's life. But I think my first film review was probably when I was already arts and culture editor at the Varsity, and I was like, okay, I'm here, I might as well. So I guess I was fortunate in that way. But pitching for me has always been a moment of like desperation. Like, trust me, I can do this. I have the language, I have the means. So just let me do it. And somehow I've been fortunate a few times. So yeah.
Well, that comes back so interestingly to Winnie's experience of not initially wanting to mention that they have a fashion newsletter. And I think it's interesting because it's sort of counterintuitive, but it is this fact of desperation of being like, no, I'm actually the perfect person to be writing this. But then you also get into the complication of writing quite frequently and having to always be the perfect person to write something. I was actually going to ask a second question to you, Divine, about student newspapers, because as you mentioned, you were writing quite a bit for the Varsity and for student newspapers at UTM. How has student journalism informed your critical practice? Are there instincts or approaches you developed while writing for these venues?
I think it built in me a kind of rigor in my practice because in undergrad, I tried to make it a point to write a piece like every week. I don't know how, but I was somehow able to do that consistently, and it was a very like difficult muscle to develop. But I find that I'm now able to think and observe and just like write in a very clear way, in a way that's accessible. I remember thinking that like, oh, to be a good critic, you must use this like high purple prose and like speak from above. And I think being a student journalist taught me that you really don't need to do that, and people won't really read that. And yeah, there's other ways to be interesting and say the point that you're making without losing any like beauty or aesthetic pleasure. Yeah.
I love that. I want to come back a little bit to something that we talked about actually a few days ago in preparation for this panel. I'd love to get a sense of which critics you enjoy reading. Winnie, you mentioned A.S. Hamra, who is someone who was also really informative to my early kind of forays into criticism. But we discussed off camera how it's a bit shocking how many writers don't actually make a habit of reading. And this is something I think you encounter more and more as you get sort of deeper and deeper into the industry. So it'd be good to, I think, have an idea of critics that you enjoy reading in your own time. Winnie, do you want to start?
Sure. Okay, I always talk about this writer, Phoebe Chen. She's one of my favorite writers. She's based in New York. What I love about her writing is that she's always acknowledging a world like beyond the film. Like she's referencing like literature and philosophy, the director's like other works. Her prose is so delicious, and she's always crafting these beautiful sentences that totally mesmerize and like entrance me. I'm always thinking about her review of Undine for Artforum. Just, like the first two sentences are just incredible, and I'm like reading them to people at like parties. I also love my friend Claire Foster, who also has exquisite prose and takes risks, and I love that she references the act of writing in her work. I love Melissa Anderson, who is the film editor for Four Columns. She also contributes there. Her writing is sharp and witty and funny, and I love this like one review of like Stop Making Sense, which is a film that I love, and I love David Byrne, but she totally like takes it down and kind of questions what was going on with that restoration a couple of years ago, and how the way that David Byrne was acting back then is kind of at odds with his current project of like promoting Community Now. And then she ends the review by saying like, stop making nonsense, which I love. And then Emma Hager is another writer I love. She writes for The Nation, The Drift, N+1. Not as much in film, but she does a lot in like literature. She writes about California and the environment, and that has also influenced the way that I think about the environment and kind of locality and geography in my writing, and I'm trying to incorporate that more and more. Yeah, some of my favorite writers.
I think the Phoebe Chen Undina interview was like a canon experience.
It's true.
It's so good. I made like a mental list of some of my favorite critics, and I wondered how many of them would end up naturally overlapping with yours. And we've got a tight list. Divine, would you like to add some of your favorite critics?
Yeah, I tend to read criticism in a very like broad way. If a sentence is good, I will just like follow wherever it's going. And recently I've been reading a lot of, I read a bunch of Zadie Smith's essays. She's not really a film critic per se. She's more of like a literary person, but she talks about film in her essays, or like she uses film as a way of like looking at the world. And I think that's the way I try to approach film criticism as well. So she has a great review of like The Social Network and films like Her and Nymphomaniac. And I've read a lot of Andrea Long Chu. I know she's very controversial for her like takedowns of not only filmmakers but writers and just anyone she writes about. But I find her mind very interesting, so I read a lot of that. And I've been reading, what else have I been reading? I've been reading a lot of like Afro-pessimist texts, like Frank B. Wilderson and Sadia Hartman. They're like more philosophy, but they help me to like recognize themes when I'm like trying to analyze a text or like a film or whatever. So Oh yeah, Susan Sontag is like a huge one for me. Yeah.
Beautiful. Have you read Andrea Longchu's emails?
Emails? No.
Emails.
Oh.
It's kind of like a Valerie Solanas redux.
Oh, I have not read Females, but I have read her essay on liking women. Like that is probably my favorite essay like of all time. It's chills down the spine, kind of good. Like it's just like wow. Yeah.
Excellent. I want to stay just a little bit longer on you two as readers as well as writers. As readers, are you more drawn to reviews of new releases or perhaps essays or personal essays, or the kind of different dimension of profiles and interviews? Yeah, what are you drawn to, but also does that appetite translate into your own writing?
I love reviews and essays. And I enjoy reading interviews, but I don't think that I'm a particularly good interviewer or like a dazzling interviewer. I'd love to like hang out and chat with a filmmaker, but I don't think the questions that I want to ask would be interesting to readers. And I think you have a responsibility maybe to your readers. So I tend not to pitch interviews, but my friends Tia Glista and Christopher Heron are both excellent interviewers, and I always look forward to reading their work. I just personally prefer reviews and essays, and kind of once a film is like out in the world, it's mine, and I want to engage with it. And it's not that I don't care what they think, but I care about what I think.
I love that. Just to quickly intervene, Tia Glista, amazing freelance writer. Christopher Heron manages the Seventh Art. Definitely recommend to anyone who's watching. Yeah, Divine, would you like to add?
Yeah. I think I have this idea that like everything is low-key a text, so I'm happy to like interview, I'm happy to like write an essay, I'm happy to, I don't know, do whatever, draw a picture. And I think also because I'm a very like mimetic individual, I am like curious about what people are thinking and like what made them do this and that. And yeah, I do enjoy a good interview now and then, just to understand for myself and to like have that piece of knowledge within me to like produce somewhere else if I choose to. But yeah, like I'm like an essay person, but I love an interview. I love any way I can like communicate and interact and just like obtain new knowledge. So yeah.
Can I ask you a follow-up on that? Because I really like this idea of kind of everything as a text. Do you find that you approach interviewing someone in the same way that you would approach constructing a review or an essay?
Not necessarily. I think with interviews, I kind of want to point a person in a specific direction or prod something that I think is like interesting. And then I want to let them like lead from there. Like I take a very interactive approach with interviewing, because I want to be affected as much as I'm affecting them. And with essays, I really try to like turn everything inside out and like understand it to the core, or at least like know everything about what it is I'm trying to interpret or analyze. Yeah, and I think that's what makes those two things interesting in their own unique ways to me.
Thank you. Winnie, I wanted to ask you a question that is something that I think about quite a bit in my own practice. You come from, in part, you come from an academic background in cinema studies. Have you found that your academic writing has influenced your critical writing or vice versa, either positively or negatively?
Yeah, I mean, I think my academic background has influenced my critical writing, in the sense that I'm that background gave me, theorists to draw on. It gave me the confidence to write about film. But I would say that film criticism is a lot different because it's public facing. It's very public facing. And I feel very aware of the fact that I could lose my readers' attention at any point to like a tab that's more interesting or like a notification on their phone that pops up. And I am just trying to be, more like attention grabbing or like really think about my sentences, where sometimes academic writing can be a little bit more dry. You're saying that you're going to lay out your arguments instead of doing it for a while. And at the beginning, I think some of my writing tended to sound a little bit more academic, and I had feedback from writers like, this is not academia. Like, we are trying to grab someone's attention from the first sentence. And that is something that I've had to keep in mind. I've been able to shake it off a little bit more, but yeah, it did influence it, maybe, for better and for worse.
I find it a very difficult line to thread myself. It's something that I end up kind of doing academic writing and critical writing side by side a lot of the time. And I realize that in my own practice, a lot of my academic writing can read a little bit too, not argumentative, but a little bit too soft sometimes, in a way that I think academic writing is quite hard and quite firm. So yeah, I was just curious about that. I want to ask you both. We're kind of past the days where the dream of a salaried critic position is a reality. So the critic often becomes a kind of cultural worker within the field, also working in programming or film academia or moderating. I wonder for you two, do you find this blurring of professions to be generative for your wider work as a critic? Or do these kind of feel like more hurdles in what's meant to be a relatively straightforward position? Divine, maybe we could start with you.
I think, like, for better and for worse, it has opened me up to, I don't know, like a wider world of things to do with my skills and my abilities and my time. And in many ways, I'm appreciative of the like diversity of options that I have before me. Like I'm writing obviously, but then I have like all that I find interesting that's completely different from criticism or writing at all. And then I could be doing something on the side that's like more visual based. And I think like being able to express myself in these different ways does good things for like my own creative muscles, because I think like any artist or like craftsman wants to try like their hand at many things. And like I'm thinking of Sontag, who was like a writer, a playwright, a filmmaker. Like she did like everything. So I think on that level, like I'm not mad. Yeah.
Thank you. Winnie, I'm curious to hear as well.
Yeah, I find it generative. I'm generally incapable of just being one thing in all areas of my life and just like choosing one path. So I like kind of cobbling things together and working across industry programming, film programming, criticism, arts administration. I think it should be an option for folks who want to just do one thing, just be a salaried film critic. But I find switching between roles to be really stimulating and dynamic. And being in cultural work broadly helps me to understand like the ecosystem at large, like what's happening behind the scenes, like why are films like that? It's because of the grant system. Or like why certain programming decisions are made because of sales agents. I think just like having a panoramic view really helps me be more generous or critical of certain trends in film. So I think it's more generative. I'm curious about what you think, though, too.
I think in my own experience, the way that I've just kind of come to understand it is rather than wearing several hats, which I think is the phrase that's often used for critic, programmer, industry workers, moderators, what have you. I think that it's kind of one big hat. I like the use of the word panoramic there. I think it gives you more insight and kind of a better vantage into how films are made. But then I also sometimes feel when I'm writing, having a sort of awareness about how exactly something might have been constructed can be difficult, because I wonder how stimulating that can be for a reader who maybe isn't working in the industry. So I sometimes have to resist my own urges to be like, oh, well, we can assume that maybe like XYZ thematic trope or visual trope or whatever is directly like causally related to like an industry decision. Sometimes I have to cut those out of my pieces, even though I genuinely find them interesting, because I don't know how readers will process something like that. In terms of work, like it's the only way that I've been able to work. I work as a critic, but I can only work as a critic because I work as an academic and as a moderator and as a programmer. And it's none of these jobs could work completely on their own, both I think monetarily and also like just stimulation wise. I think I would get so aggressively bored. So yeah, I think I probably land in a similar place as you two, where it's I'm happy that I have the option, but there is still kind of a lingering frustration in the idea that it's like, okay, well, I have to do this because I can't just write all day if I feel like it. Something that this kind of reminds me of in both of your work, and something that I'm also striving to go forward a little bit more, is you're both quite multidisciplinary in your writing. Winnie, you also write literary criticism, and Divine, you also write theater criticism. I'm interested in how each of you are maybe drawn to the works that you cover, or if there's certain themes that you're leaning towards across mediums or across disciplines, and just how you're picking kind of where you're covering things. Divine, maybe you want to start.
Yeah, I think I'm generally drawn to anything that grants me some kind of sensuous experience. Like I want my senses to be like flooded with like, oh my goodness, like this is like wonderful, you know? Like if it's a film, like I want to be like viscerally affected. Like I like feeling like something is like seizing me, you know, in like any form of like art. If it's like film, theater, even like books that I read, like I just want to be seized by the art. And I do theater a lot because I've found that watching people do on stage in front of you what is like edited and then like filmed and then projected on a screen in some ways has a more like visceral capacity and like an interesting intensity. And then with film, I just like the whatever it does like for the mind and how it helps me think in very like poetic frameworks and things like that. Yeah, that's how I go about that.
I love also the sense of kind of immediacy with something like theater, because that's just, to me, I've written about theater only a handful of times, and it's something that I want to do quite a bit more, but I've felt this sort of immense amount of pressure of not being able to fully translate some of my skills as a film critic to something that has like its own sort of tools and practice, and also liveness in a way that film often doesn't. So that's very interesting to hear. Winnie, did you want to add?
Yeah, I've written a couple of book reviews, and I would say the books tend to have some kind of like visual component or like are related to film in some way. I wrote about Swimming Studies by Leanne Shapton, which includes some of her watercolor illustrations. But she's also like the art director for New York Review of Books. She's done like title cards for films. And then I've written about No Fault by Haley Melodic, which includes a lot of like film descriptions or references and analysis. I'm really interested in the relationship between like word and image, like what one can do that the other can't, like what those differences can generate. I'm also drawn to works by people who are multidisciplinary themselves, and I think that shows me like what other people are doing, how they're able to make it, and inspires me so much how people are able to like draw from so many different areas of their lives and interests. So I think it's maybe also a selfish act that I'm reading and writing about those works so that I can better understand myself.
I don't think it's selfish to consume works that you find generative in your own life. I feel like that's a lot of kind of what Divine, I think, was early on saying with this idea of like finding a mirror in what you're consuming. I think that's actually quite ideal, that I understand also your impulses. I'm very interested, this is where I get quite like nerdy and into the processes of things. I'm very interested in your research processes. So maybe we'll say specifically when writing something like a film review, or if not even a film review, just a review of any work, where do you tend to begin research-wise? What do you feel like you need to seek out before or during the analysis of an art object? You can also take your time with that. I feel like I've been immediately
Yeah.
go, but no, take your time. And
Maybe you can go first.
what I was going to say is like I've asked a question that I wouldn't want to answer, which is like kind of fun being on this side of things. But for me, I find this is maybe true more recently because I've been doing some literary criticism, and like you, Winnie, I think I'm incredibly drawn to kind of the visual world that can be built out of literature and how that engages some of my senses as like a film consumer. And I tend myself to be drawn to things that I just immediately don't know. Like sometimes there are phrases or like cultural norms or things that the first time I'm reading them, or if I'm watching something the first time I'm watching them, I get caught and I kind of feel at a distance. I think that I like that position of being like, okay, I need to find my entry point here. And it's often into things that I don't fully understand on the first go. And I kind of build research around that. I don't love researching just like if I'm like interviewing an artist, I don't like going to their Wikipedia page and being like, well, you know, what all did they do? I kind of take like a backwards sort of entrance there and through either their writing or their images or things that kind of confound me maybe the first time. And then I inevitably work my way to figuring out what all they do.
That's a great answer. I'm still thinking about one. I feel like I'm sometimes like looking at their other works, like their other books they've written, to think about like their practice, what kind of themes recur, other films that they've made, and you know, if they've done like shorts, features, documentary fiction, they're like switching between modes. But I tend to like narrow in on like a specific thing and like I'll dive deep on that rather than kind of doing like a broad overview. I'm interested in like what influences they've had and like seeing if those influences have like seeped through, like what books or music or theater or sculptures or things that they like, what food they like to eat. Like those are the kind of things that I'm interested in when I'm researching, to see like how their worlds are shaped. And then again, yeah, it's like once it's mine, like I'm trying not too much to allow those like outside things to influence my opinion of a film. Of course, if like a film is like about something that's like historically based that I don't have like a lot of knowledge of, that like I want context about, I will do a deep dive on that, just so that I understand like a culture or situation or circumstance around that, but I'm trying not to do too much research in general, I would say.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think for me, I just I begin with the images and whatever I've experienced in like my senses. So I really hone in on colors and how I felt and what I saw. And then from there, I build a kind of opinion, or like I find like a few ideas or themes, and then I go into what the art object itself is trying to do, and then I go into the artist, like what they're trying to do and where they come from, what else they've done, and try to really look at what they have brought into the world prior to this, and what they seem to have been influenced by. I also like to think through other writers and other people's ideas to like build my own. So that always helps. And yeah, I recently read Sontag's Against Interpretation. So I also like try to not go in too deep and just like try to like focus on the feelings and like what the art object is. So yeah.
I like that. I was going to add to what Winnie was saying as well about this idea of influences. Something that I've become so interested in myself, especially when I'm interviewing, is there's like obviously conscious influences, especially I think visual art, other films or in literature. But I have gotten into the habit of trying to inquire about what an artist, or mostly directors, but what an artist was kind of consuming themselves right before they started the project. See if there's any like lingering kind of residue from what they might have been reading or an exhibit they might have gone to. And sometimes there is this sort of unconscious thing. And it just made me think of that. I wanted to also ask kind of briefly, are you two note takers during a film? Like if you're seeing a film that you want to write about, are you like, because I'm a mess. Like I'll write like 10 pages. It's really bad.
Whoa.
It's not good. It's completely distracting from the actual experience, and it's something I want to get better at. I was at a film with Christopher Heron during TIFF. It was the new Lucretia Martel film, and he didn't have a notebook, and he took no notes, and the film ended, and he went, "Yeah, I'm gonna go interview Lucretia in a few hours," and I was like, "Right, this is a very different experience than how I approach it." So I'm curious about the two of you.
I mean, I used to be a note taker. I used to write so much. And with film I would like do it. This feels like so sacrilegious to say, but like because I could not see my notebook, I just had to take notes on like my notes app with like dimmed lighting and stuff. Like it was horrible.
So
So I completely stopped note taking. I just don't do it anymore. And I just trust whatever I experienced to somehow translate itself in total capacity in my writing. And usually, well, I think not usually, I believe it always does. So yeah.
I take notes, but I can't read them. Is the issue. Like I come out of the screening and it's like there's overlap. I can't read like what I'm like, oh, this is a great quote for whatever review I'm writing. And then I get out and I'm like, no, like I can't use this because I don't know what this says. So maybe I should stop. I don't know if I find it very helpful. Saffron, because you take notes, like I'm curious, like how are you taking the notes in the dark? Like just practically.
I also sorry, there's someone like vacuuming outside my door. I don't know. I'll speak up. Oh my god, they're getting closer. I take very rigorous notes, but not about anything that I think actually matters. Like, I think it's, or not matters, but they're so personal. Like, I'll take notes being like, this reminds me of something from when I was like 3 years old, because it's like, it will never make it into a piece, but it will always just be like a good way for me to actually remember the image, if it's a particular image that I'm trying to recall. So I write all these sort of shorthands for like remembering a scene, and it's all super personal. In terms of like the actual logistics of writing them out, I don't know how I've done it. There's still overlap, but over the years now, I've been doing this for like 8 years, and I would say like maybe like 5 years professionally. Within the last 5 years, I've just been able to make clean lines in the dark, like super, janky handwriting. But for whatever reason, no matter how I'm oriented, I can do the lines. It's like my one, I was going to say party trick, but that would be really sad if that's we've got only about 15 minutes left. Something that I would really love to do is to delve into some of your pieces, like 2 individual pieces, one from each of you, to get a sense of how you went about possibly structuring or writing them. Winnie, if you don't mind, I'd like to start with you. You wrote a really wonderful essay on Madeleine van Erlich's debut feature, The Ballad of Suzanne Suzanne, for the LA Review of Books. And in it, you write very personally and reflexively about your experience watching the film, reading Suzanne Césare's literature, and also constructing the review. So I wanted to ask you maybe if you could speak a little bit about that, but also how you kind of went about finding and inserting your own voice into this piece. And I'll say that is the piece there. And I will say just a quick aside for folks who maybe don't know, The Ballad of Suzanne Césaire is a sort of film shot within a film. So Winnie's attention to construction and this kind of piece within a piece structure, I find very wonderful and like a beautiful way of matching what the film is able to do.
Yeah, thank you for picking up on that. I really wanted to reflect the film's reflexivity in my own writing. So for folks who don't know, the film is kind of like a anti-biopic about Suzanne Césaire, who is a writer, activist, teacher, mother, organizer from Martinique. And she was also the wife of Aimé Césaire. And it follows this actress who is on a film production set who's like preparing to play the role of Suzanne, and she's like reading her essays and her letters in an attempt to like understand her better, but then there's this impossibility of fully knowing her. So I wanted to be more creative in my approach to writing about this film. And the LA Review of Books is a publication that kind of welcomes that kind of engagement. It welcomes like a writerly voice, so I knew that they would be receptive to me thinking about my mother and my changing understanding of her relationship to motherhood and creativity and perhaps obligation, and then writing about constructing a review in my review. I was really inspired by my friend Claire Foster, who has also written for the same publication. And in her reviews, she's written things like, why am I stretching this review to do this thing? Or she writes, if I were to write a conclusion, it would be in the shape of a question mark. And I thought a film about writing and the creative process was sort of inviting a response that would think about the process of its own creation. So I felt, like a freedom to write about it for this film. And I wanted to take a sort of creative or artistic risk. And I'm looking to do more writing that does that, to write about objects that allow me to be more experimental as a writer.
Thank you for sharing that. I think it's so interesting to pose it as a risk, which it of course is, because I think any kind of experimental essaying kind of falls under that banner because it reads so naturally. And I think posing it also against other reviews of the film, which are like taking up everything that the film is doing, but not being able to fully comprehend the structure of it, it's really impressive to me that you're able to kind of, without even directly invoking that, just match it and meet it where it's at. So yeah, beautiful piece. Divine, I wanted to pull up a piece of yours upon your suggestion. You reviewed Celine Song's Materialists recently for Next Magazine. We were at that screening together. We were sitting beside each other. And you engaged the film's plot with really poetic descriptions. One of them that I really loved was like the buttery texture of the film's image, which, like a realist painting, evokes an insatiable hunger to not just buy, but also bite into this tasty material world. Beautiful description. Do you find that these sorts of images or descriptions come to you while you're watching the film, or do they develop during the writing process? And also would just love to hear more about how you went about writing this piece.
Thank you. I think the way I write, and like the example that you quoted, things like that come to me, I think, as I'm writing, because I'm trying to recall how I felt and like what the film made me feel. And I think that film specifically, Celine Song, for better or worse, kind of made it look so delectable and like delicious, and like in that texture of the images, you just like felt I want to like grasp whatever was like on screen. And then I just try to follow sensations like that to ask, okay, why does it feel like this? Like, why did she make it feel like this? And one could argue that in some ways the film was perpetuating whatever it is it was trying to criticize, but then maybe it was like doing the appropriate thing by like portraying this like world of wealth and like materialism in that way. So yeah.
I think that something that I've been really interested in, and this I really feel engages, is this sort of poetics of description. And this is something that I'm developing kind of in my own time, is to find a film criticism exercise that can actually leave plot or rhetoric or theme outside of it and just stick to your personalized sort of experience watching something, or the descriptive aspects of a scene, but finding your own language in doing so. And I think that that piece is such a beautiful example of that. You have such a key awareness of plot, but it's the same sort of thing that I'm pointing out also in Winnie's piece, where there's this like these personal sort of interventions at the level of like, well, this is what the film is telling me to do, and here's my kind of direct response to it, at the level of language, which I think is really wonderful. I wanted to ask, we don't have a ton of time left, but I wanted to get into what the editing process was like for these pieces, kind of maybe what your relationship to editing is broadly, and whether you uncovered parts of the finished piece within the edit, or if new ideas or structures were sort of presented to you through that.
Mine, my piece only had very like cosmetic edits, is what the editor called it. So there wasn't a lot for this one. I tend to like self-edit a lot and like stress over word choice and clarity on my own. But in general, I would say the edits that I like and that I get are like very structural. It's like moving something from the end to the beginning to the end, or like flipping the first and second half, so that like readers are more prepared for something. I love an edit. I love editors, and I welcome editors to be as harsh as they want. It used to be a very daunting process, and I used to like only be able to like look at all like the 80 suggestions on my phone so that I wouldn't like have a heart attack looking at it on Google Docs. But I'm a lot better at it now. But for this particular piece, it was very short.
For me, the editing process was also shorter and I guess more smooth sailing. I remember receiving edits about, and like this is a thing that happens a lot with just writing a sentence to be accessible to anyone who wants to read. So I think things about, oh, this sentence was too clunky, or like we don't really need to describe all that, or you don't need to do that much to like relay a message, because there's like an interesting distinction between like art and craft. And I think with editors, I think their job is to like help us remain within the realm of craft and like not go into like the artsy side too much. So yeah, that was what the editing process looked like.
Thank you. We have one question from the audience. I'll read that out to you now. Do you think there's a need for a mean critic? How do you approach works you don't like because they offend your sensibilities, barring any oppressive depictions at play? It's a tough question.
I think yes. I think there's a need for a quote unquote mean critic. I think there actually aren't enough mean critics, and that we, not we, but publicists and studios are often inviting like influencers who will only sing the praises of the film because they want to get invited to more events. So there's certainly a need for people who are, not paid, or people who are objective, people who are willing to be thoughtful and critical of a film. Being critical doesn't necessarily mean being mean, but to have that as an option, there's definitely a need for that. How do I approach works that I don't like? I think I'm always approaching them in a way where if I was confronted with this filmmaker, if I met them, that I would be able to like face them, even if I didn't like their film, because my negative assessment of that film is rooted in my experience or something that I've thought a lot about and that I'm able to like back myself up. It's never like, I'm never saying like this film is garbage and unwatchable and terrible. Like I'm saying like, here's why I didn't resonate with this aspect, or like this portrayal of this specific event. I think it like sensationalizes this thing, or I think that this panders to a white audience and I am not that white audience. So, and the beginnings of my career were kind of these mean pieces of criticism. So I find that like I'm able to approach that a little bit better now. But yes, there's a need. I'm curious about what you two think.
I think there is a need for, I'll say, yeah, like I'm a mean critic, because I like, not mean for the sake of being mean, but if a work warrants criticism, then it should be criticized. And that's why I enjoy Andrea Longchu, because she is so mean, and but like she's also so thoughtful in the way that she's mean, and the only kind of mean that like I can tolerate and understand. Like you must really do it in like a critical and in a very serious way, not to like entertain, but to really try to understand the work and the art object. And I also have learned to like move away from liking everything, because I'm like a very like optimistic like person, I think. And even when I like consume art, I like want to feel good about it. And I've also like recently learned to be okay with not enjoying everything. So I've tried to take an approach of like I think of myself as a kind of psychoanalyst. Like, okay, this is not horrible, but like, why did you do that? Because this is what it looks like. This is how it reads to people. So maybe don't do that. So yeah.
Why did you do that is so good. I will quickly add in my thoughts. I'm not sure if the question is for all of us. I think I note the fact that mean is in quotations here, and that it might not directly correspond with like just being vitriolic or being unkind, and it might be more voicing dissent. I mean, we'll echo both of your thoughts. I think that critics could stand to be meaner in this current ecosystem, where I feel like a lot of the, for instance, something like a pull quote or promotions that are being solicited to promote films are coming from people who are deeply incentivized to say incredibly positive things about those films. And I think that anyone who is in the practice of making movies, I would, really deeply hope that they're also in the practice of engaging with what audiences have to say about that. And I think there's sometimes a separation between critics and audiences. And for me, like, I'm a viewer as much as I am a critic. So there are times where I think it makes total sense to voice dissent and to kind of reiterate something that Winnie said. Like, there are most of my, I would say, meaner pieces are actually really centered around the idea that a film is created for a kind of very white gaze, and that I'm immediately alienated from that. And that's not a critique unto itself, but it's something that the director or the people involved in the film should be considering. And I think that if we're talking about this idea of new critics and new perspectives, these are things that kind of need to be integrated. But if we're talking about like mean, vitriolic, sort of just rude criticism for the sake of it, I don't know many people who engage in things like that. I don't know how profitable it is anymore. There was definitely a time where it was. So I will say that I'm not for that. And I'm definitely not also for punching down. I think that I would never watch a film made on a tiny budget and be like, this film has really low production value. Like, you need to meet the film sort of with where it's at. And I tend to like to save my meaner critiques for bigger budget films, which stand to do quite well, whether I think positively or negatively about them. And on that very joyful note, that's all the time that we have. Thank you so much, Winnie and Divine, for your generosity and your insights. It was such a pleasure getting to chat with you both together. Thank you as well to Real World for having us. Enjoy the rest of your days.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.